Welcome to your year 2021 Zodiac forecast. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd be honoured if you'd subscribe to my channel. Now I'm going to provide a penetrative insight for each of the 12 zodiac signs, so please stay with me for that. But just to say, if you'd like to ascend beyond your zodiac sign, which is just based on the location of the sun and how the planets interact with that, and find out what this new year will hold for you as an individual, there is nothing more accurate and telling than a personal forecast. Now you can get your 12-month personal forecast for 2021 plus a character analysis for 30% off, a special offer. Please see the link below. But also know, if you order in 2020, I'll give you the rest of 2020 free. So if you order in October, you get October, November, December, plus the following 12 months. Now your zodiac forecast is going to be of great interest to you, of course, and it does give us a fascinating insight into what we can expect. But of course, the zodiac or the horoscope contains much more information than just our sun. And that's where that personal horoscope comes in. But also, as we start each year, we have a solar return. And I want you to think of that solar return at midnight on the 1st of January 2021 as like your personal birth chart. It gives us a blueprint of what we can all expect collectively for this new year. So I'm going to share that information next. But when I go into your zodiac forecast, I'll be sharing different wheels, the different eclipses, to give you a really big opportunity to get a feel for what's coming for you. But astrology is basically the study of time. And when events happen in the past, when particular planetary alignments occur, when we look forwards to see when those alignments will happen again, it gives us a bit of a clue of what we can expect. And the fascinating thing, of course, is that as 2020 came to a close on the 8th of December, Saturn moved back into Aquarius. It had been there from the 22nd of March to the 2nd of August, 2020. But it moves from the cold sign of Capricorn, which it governs in its dignity. It's the sole ruler of Capricorn. And it moved into the sign of Aquarius, where it's the co-regent, along with Uranus. Now it was joined on the 20th of December by Jupiter. And then on the 21st of December, they came into a conjunction. And that conjunction is still there. It's not quite exact, but it's still there as we begin this new year. Now, what we can learn from those past events is that the last time this happened was in fact in 1405. So a very, very long time ago, and that was on the 7th of January. And I think what began at that time was the Cultural Revolution in a way. So what we can expect this year is a revolution, that's for sure. And of course we were seeing elements of that revolution beginning last year, and part of the revolution can be evolution. It doesn't always have to be turbulent, but there are certain parts of what happened in 2020 that were, of course, very turbulent. Now, the conjunction that goes between the planets of Jupiter, which is about expansion and growth and optimism, and Saturn, which is about resistance, obstacles, boundaries, tradition, usually happens just under every 20 years, about 19.8 years. This is because Jupiter takes 11.8 years to go through its cycle, and Saturn takes 29.5 years to complete its cycle. And over the last 1,000 years, predominantly, the three signs that this conjunction has occurred in most of all are of Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Pisces. So that's what makes this Aquarius conjunction so absolutely blindingly exciting. Now, it's also true to say that the eclipse cycle that we welcomed in on the 14th of December 2020 was the Saros cycle that is featuring the polar axes of Sagittarius and Gemini. Now that began on the 30th of May 1984 in the sign of Gemini with a solar eclipse. And if we look back to when eclipse cycles begin, that gives us a big idea of what they may bring in their wake. So that one had Saturn and Mars conjunct in the sign of Scorpio, very much to do with finance, but also to do with desire, could even say lust. But Saturn, of course, is about discipline, it's about those structures, and Mars, certainly in its second home zone of Scorpio, is very much about desire. So you can see that a certain amount of repression would come from that particular conjunction, but also the potential to work very hard on resources. And I think in terms of the material world, there's been a lot of development since 1984, and some people would argue a lot of growth. But on the other side of the heavens, where the eclipse occurred, not only did we have the solar eclipse in the wonderful, quick-witted Gemini, we also had Venus there, which is very flirty and alluring and attractive. But we also had Chiron, and that is the wounded healer, and that was conjunct the North Node and Venus. So for me, this pattern that we're beginning this year, or picking up the thread of, which has been rejuvenated by the solar eclipse in Sagittarius on the 14th of December, which forged an amazingly positive angle to Mars. So I think we're all going to be feeling a lot more hopeful as we come to the end of this year, because last year, 2020, was just so terribly trying. I think we are going to have a much greater sense of momentum, a much greater sense that something is shifting and moving in our consciousness, our way of being. But I think that gathering of energy back in 1984 in Gemini was really a lot to do with the way society has changed since then, not just in a material sense, but also in a social sense. So we've seen a mass transformation in the way we consume information, the media, which has come through the internet, and of course printed media has declined quite sharply, but they're very much governed by the sign of Gemini. So we could say that Chiron, the wounded healer, being in that part of the situation in conjunction with Venus, points towards a wound in what we believe in. And I think with that energy all clustered together based on universal central time in the 8th house of transformation, very Scorpionic itself, and Mars and Saturn in conjunction in Scorpio, we have had a lot of lust since 1984, and we have had a lot of challenges to ideas, because if we go back to that time, I think there was much more of an orthodox that most people were expected to fit into. People have found their voices, they expect to have their voice. Now on the other side of the heavens, with the solar eclipse that occurred on the 14th of December 2020, Sagittarius energy is about the higher principle of communication. So it's about philosophy, it's about the intellect, it's about history, travel, it's about borders. It can be about laws and regulations, but it's very much to do with trying to find the higher principles of society. And because it forged an amazing link with Mars, I think both being fire signs, after the really pulverizing difficulties of 2020, which saw the end of an eclipse cycle between the axes of Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, so that's very much to do with emotion, the family, security, the seas, the waters, if you like, and on the other side, the harsh, cold reality of business, big industries, and materialism in perhaps its most extreme form, which has battled with the need to find emotional security on the other side of the heavens in Cancer. So we've had this big battle going on over the last couple of years, which has really been very difficult. And I feel that obviously there are some institutions, some business strands, some countries which will try to withhold or to hold on to power in a very oppressive way. And on the other side of the heavens, we had the moon is the repressed emotions that have been held down for a long time, especially to do with civil rights and people speaking up much more ardently about what they want. So the Sagittarius energy that is coming along, which re-evokes that first 1984 eclipse in Gemini, when this Saros eclipse cycle began, is very much about communication and information. So this year we're going to see a lot of sharing of ideas, that's for sure. And of course, we're seeing a lot of polarization in people's viewpoints and a lot of outspoken expression of ideas, and sometimes not enough tolerance. So that's an interesting principle. So as we come into this new year, although Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, and of course it was co-present with Jupiter over the last year as Jupiter made its way through the sign of Capricorn, where of course it's not at its best, it's in its fall, and we've had a fall in the stock market. And also if we look back to when Jupiter and Pluto were last together, that was in 2008 in Capricorn, we had a fall in the stock market. If we go back to that eclipse cycle beginning in 1984, guess where Jupiter was? Yes, in Capricorn. And guess what happened that year? Yes, we had a fall in the stock market. It wasn't perhaps as quite as catastrophic as 2008 or perhaps even 2020. And that might be because when Saturn and Mars are together, particularly in the sign of Scorpio, which is very much about marshalling investments and pensions and all the rest of it, I think that Saturn was probably a stabilising influence, and all that Gemini stuff was in the 8th house of business anyway. But the Dow Jones did shrink 4% in 1984, so we can see as Jupiter makes its way through Capricorn every 12 years or so, it's not for the best when it comes for finance, investment, business generally. So as we come into this new year, Jupiter and Saturn are together and they are still co-present. And some astrologers would argue, therefore, that because Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, the traditional ruler, that some of the more cool, repressive energies of Capricorn will still be to the fore. And they could be right. But for me, I think it's more about detachment. So what we're going to get over the next 2.25 years, as Saturn makes its way through the sign of Aquarius, is the Aquarius energies of kindness, of fairness, of truth can be melded to the more reserved nature of Saturn. So, for example, home working is very Aquarius, which has come about more because of COVID-19. It's very Aquarius, very independent. It's using technology, which Aquarius also welcomes for its modern ruler of Uranus. But in actual fact, I think it's going to lead to a lot of creeping isolation. I think people could kind of start to see that the world could become a kind of dystopianly detached place, which is not necessarily quite the utopia that people talk about for the Aquarian age. But that's where Jupiter can be a modifying influence for the cooler energies of Saturn. And I think the two together, as we turn into this new year, are going to be for the good. So this year is going to see Sagittarius and Gemini eclipse energy, apart from one lunar eclipse which will occur in the sign of Taurus. But what's really important is that Neptune, the planet of dreams, is going to be impacting all of these eclipses and also the North Node as we go through the whole of this year. The North Node is the kind of emotional direction of travel or society. It's in Gemini. It returns to 1 degree Gemini by the end of the year. But of course it's an air sign, just like Saturn and Jupiter begin the year in. So that airiness can be there, but that watery, eroding energy of Neptune can provide distortion. And I think the thing that's really going to be at stake this year, just as much as it has been in recent years, is the whole concept of the truth. You know, when we've got big media platforms saying it's not their role to govern the truthfulness or accuracy of what people say because everyone is entitled to an opinion, we're heading into really dark territory in my viewpoint. Traditional media, even if you're not a fan, has to live to certain parameters that come from regulation, even if sometimes they have stepped outside of it, probably quite often. But there is some regulation in place, whereas a lot of new media doesn't have any regulation, and that means that truth or facts get distorted to suit particular people's agendas. And I think we are going to still continue to have a lot of that in 2021. Now, the other thing that perhaps is not quite so well known is that although Jupiter will like being in Aquarius, and it is going to be much more expansive than it has been in the sign of Capricorn, it's not going to stay in Aquarius for the whole of this year. It's going to move mid-May into the sign of Pisces, and it's going to be there through to the 27th of July. Now, Jupiter, in fact, is the ruling planet or the co-ruler of Pisces, so it's returning home. And so that's an interesting one, but it does start to go into retrograde from the 20th of June for 4 months. So I think we might see a revival initially in the cruise industry by the middle of May. We might see bookings starting over again if COVID is coming back under a bit more control, as I believe it will. But I feel that once that retrograde begins, it is going to be very interesting how that affects the cruise industry. And the other thing I need to tell you is that in astrology, when we take a particular point like that solar return at the start of the year, we get a map just like your personal horoscope. And that solar return, I've created it based on universal central time. And the ascendant is actually in Libra, which is very much about finding balance. But the midpoint between the sun and the moon's in the sign of Leo as we begin this new year, and the sun will be in Capricorn as usual. So the midpoint between the two is 21 degrees in Libra. So this is going to be very much a Libran year. And 21 degrees Libra is quite a fascinating point, because it is going to be next to, or very close to, a fixed star which has the characteristic of both Saturn and Jupiter. And that fixed star is called Foramen. And Foramen is very much to do with journeys, particularly sea journeys. It's said to be broadly optimistic, but it can see passages from quite tumultuous events to much more enlightened understanding. And that seems to be where the world is at the moment. We have an opportunity to change how things are, but just finding a vaccine for COVID is not the answer. Many of us won't take it. And of course, many of us don't want to be ruled by fear, so we're going to carry on our lives. So it's an interesting fixed star to have on that midpoint, but also the midpoint is ruled in terms of the 12th harmonic, or the Dward, by the sign of Gemini. So, I'm talking about this Saros eclipse series being very much to do with the polarities of Gemini and Sagittarius. Gemini, quick wits, communications, sharing of information, and the higher energy of Sagittarius. Now, like all zodiac signs, I'm not talking in terms of your zodiac sign or how you live within your zodiac sign, because we all have a choice to live to the best of our zodiac signs, or there is a more base instinct within each zodiac sign, and everybody has a choice. But this year predominantly is going to be about finding balance, it is going to be about communication, and it is going to be about trying to find a search for truth. Now, I mentioned before, what did I say for 2020? Well, the midpoint was actually in Aquarius, and it was conjunct Venus. And Venus in Aquarius is very much about us as a collective. And also it was in the 4th house, which is about our sense of security. But we also had Neptune conjunct the moon as the solar return began for 2020. Quite incredible. So the Neptune in the sign of Pisces, which it governs, conjunct the moon. And Neptune is very much about gases, infections. It can be about uncontainable situations. It can be about distortion. It was also potentially very much about spirituality. It's about healing. But having that conjunct the moon for the world collective, where we all found out that wherever we lived in the world, we were all connected to the same issue like never before. That's quite extraordinary. And the other thing that all astrologers knew, of course, was that we had the posse in Capricorn of Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto. So most astrologers believed that there would be a crash in the stock market, so we weren't wrong about that. But the implications of this infection, COVID-19, very much was there in the stars. So this year, you can see that Neptune energies are still going to be very important, and that potential for distortion or dishonesty, perhaps from politicians particularly, it can be to do with how information is shared on social media platforms particularly, but it can also be to do with our imagination, or that we have choices about the way we want to live our lives. But Sagittarius generally is very much about travel, and I think the travel industry will get revived this year, but I think we're going to see changes. So we're going to see more temperature tests at airports and ports. We may see some very quick COVID tests being enacted, which will give very quick results, and we'll start to see more and more travel picking up. It's a fact, because people don't like to be contained. And Sagittarius energy is about adventurism. It's about being very independent. And last year was very much about being locked in, which was very uncomfortable for many of us, because above all else, Sagittarius energy is about individual freedom. So this year is a very, very exciting year. It does give us an opportunity to bounce back. It's not going to be without big challenges. We do have a very pressing right angle between Saturn and Uranus, the two rulers of Aquarius, which is going to go on to about the 31st of July. It comes back from around about the last 5 days of November to the end of the year. And that's a really difficult aspect, I feel, because Uranus, of course, is in the sign of Taurus, and that's very much to do with resisting change. Taurus likes continuity, whereas Uranus likes to shake things up. So our attitude to the earth, environmentalism, how we live, how we consume, which Taurus energy is very much about as well. It's what we enjoy eating, drinking, spending our money on. Bit of luxury. We love, all of us love a bit of luxury. But that's being tempered by this potential new world order that Jupiter and Saturn initially are bringing in the sign of Aquarius, plus that solar eclipse energy that really came in with such a hurtling ferocity in its wonderful trine with Mars on the 14th of December. We've had Venus move in mid-month December into the sign of Sagittarius. So it's a much freer, looser energy as we come into this new year. But stay with me now to get the inside track on your zodiac sign, because I really feel that this is a year that we need to be informed about like no other. Hello Scorpio, and welcome to your year 2021 video forecast. If you'd like to discover what this year holds for you as an individual, and to plot your moves in as best way as possible based on your time, date and place of birth, please see the link beneath this video. You can order your 12-month forecast and character analysis and get 30% off. If you order in year 20, I'll give you the rest of that year free, as well as the 12 months from the 1st of January. If you order in 21, I'll give you 12 months from the time of your order. Now, as we begin this new year, we just have to take a peek back into 2020, because on the 14th of December, we had a new solar eclipse series begin. And this is a series based on the axis of Sagittarius, which for you is very lusty and to do with potentially improving your finances, as well as meeting your more sensual needs. And also its opposition to the other end of the polarity with the sign of Gemini, which is very passionate and transformational for you, very much in keeping with the kind of characteristics of your sign. So that's a big change, because over the last couple of years, there's been a to-in and fro-in between the sign of Cancer, very much to do with emotion, and for you, ideas, and also Capricorn, which is much more pragmatic, and your ideas about some of your belief systems that maybe have been quite rooted for some time have perhaps gone through a period of review, but this may have created a degree of nervous tension over those last couple of years. So this next couple of years gives you an opportunity to tap into your needs at a more sensory level. And needs are something that you have an attunement to, perhaps more than any other zodiac sign. So this eclipse series calls out to the basic qualities and characteristics of the sign of Scorpio, which is very, very exciting. Now, as we begin the new year, we have a solar return, and that provides an overarching energy for you for the next 12 months. And the most exciting angle I can see for you is the fact that the Sun in Capricorn forges a very enabling link to Uranus in your sector of relating. Now, Uranus has been shaking things up since the middle of May 2018 to the middle of November 2018, and from the 7th of March 2019, as it's been making its way through the sign of Taurus. Now, Taurus energy is a lot to do with stability, and because Uranus is about change, that creates a kind of resistance. And it's possible that you have been feeling restless in your attitude to relationships in general. That may have seen you want to liberate yourself from a relationship that seems cloying, or be excited by someone who's much more stimulating and challenging, or it may be that you've had the need to change things up in an existing relationship which is basically very sound, but maybe has got a little bit predictable and stale. So having the Sun in this very enhancing angle with Uranus as this new year begins tells me that for you, the desire for excitement around relationships is going to be very strong this year, as long as with that need to tune into those more sensual sides of your being. So that's the two overarching principles. Also, that solar eclipse called out to your traditional ruler of Mars. And Mars is in the part of your situation as the year begins that's to do with hard work, that's to do with perspiration, and to do with creating outcomes that give you some kind of tangible evidence of progress. So improving your financial lot this year may well be quite high up your agenda. But also at the turn of the year, we do have the midpoint between the moon, which is high in the sky in your 10th house in Leo, and the Sun in the sign of Capricorn. And that's at 21 degrees in the sign of Libra, which for you is a very tender area, the 12th house. So the midpoint essentially is a balance between our more feminine and more masculine sides of our nature. This is nothing to do with sexuality. We all have drives and determinations, and we all have more receptive energies which come through the moon. So that point is in quite a hidden area. So it tells me that even on the face of it, that the Sun's angle to Uranus could see you doing something a bit unpredictable, a bit out of character even for yourself, who likes a degree of stability or two. But there may be times this year that you will want to step back into that more reflective, deep thinking part of your nature. Also, unfortunately, the moon, for us all, it's not just your zodiac sign, is in opposition with Saturn. Now, Saturn, as you know, is the planet of structure, but it's also the planet which provides limitations and boundaries. And it's also about slowing things down sometimes. And it's moved into your sector of the 4th house. And it's alongside Jupiter for the first time in hundreds of years as this new year begins. So this is so exciting. But it suggests when the two are together that something needs reforming at the heart of your world. It could be where you live. It could be how you live there. It could be who you live with or how you live with them. Some kind of change is going to be calling out to you. Now, if you're a family person, it may be that there's going to be a new addition this year. Or it could be that you're going to want to actually move home or renovate the existing residency that you have with a new kitchen, bathroom or office. If you started to work from home, you may be adapting the space so it works more efficiently for you. So that home emotional energy is going to be a big theme for this year. But of course, Saturn does provide the structure, but it can also provide a sense of restriction. And from the middle of January through to the end of July, it's in a heavyweight right angle to Uranus. So that angle between the Sun and Uranus at the turn of the year, which is pushing you to be a bit more experimental around your relationships, means that if you do decide to change something, and Uranus is the planet of change, essentially, it's not the planet of stability, even if in Taurus energy is desperately trying to resist the changes that Uranus is provoking us to embrace. I think having Saturn in a right angle with Uranus could, if you do resist the changes that are calling out to you, could create quite a lot of stress. Now, Jupiter can create opportunities, but it has a really unusual ecliptic this year because it's going to be moving in the middle of May into the most joyous part of your scope, which is a real benefit to you, where it will be through to the 6th of July. So that gives you the chance to be much more creative and self-expressive. You already have Neptune there, and this is the planet of dreams. It's quite a magical influence in some ways, a kind of shimmering, very ephemeral kind of influence. So being self-expressive at points this year is definitely going to be heightened, but that could also call out to your idealism when it comes to your love life. Now we also have, as this year begins, a square between your two ruling planets. So Pluto, which continues in the sign of Capricorn through to 2023, where it goes through a period of months in Aquarius before returning back into Capricorn and then going back into Aquarius in 2024. And I think that really is going to be a very big time for us all. And that process of adopting those more Aquarius energies, which is to do with community, it's to do with connectivity with others, but also it can be a very independent sign as well. So there is a kind of dichotomy, a duality to the energy of Aquarius. I just feel that Pluto being in your third house of ideas and in a right angle with Mars in your sixth house of productivity as this year begins can also create a degree of stress if you feel that you're working very hard but not really seeing the outcome for all that perspiration and commitment. So we've got two quite tricky influences there, I must just be honest. And also the moon high in the sky in the sign of Leo is going to make it harder, despite the fact the midpoint being in a potentially secretive area. There's going to be another part of you that could make it harder to actually cover up any unhappiness you may have, either in your life role or your home role, because it's in opposition to Saturn. So as we go into this new year, the opportunity of the Sun in that enormously enabling angle to Uranus about being much more open-minded about relationships, and also the energy of the eclipse from the 14th of December rushing through to the 9th of June is pushing you to get some kind of obvious benefits to all your hard work. If you don't get those movements, either in a relationship or in the world of work, I think it could create a sense of restriction and frustration. So how do you deal with this? Well, the great news is that Mars is going to be moving on the 7th of January and into the sign of Taurus. And if you do need to push back, assert your boundaries, there is an opportunity to do that, particularly on the 18th and 19th of January. Now, Mercury is going to be going through 3 retrogrades this year. That's usual. Sometimes it does a partial 4th, but this year it is 3. But last year it was a real squash-a-thon. It was all the retrogrades were in water signs, including yours. This year it's all very logical. It's in the air signs. Begins with Aquarius on the 28th of January and pretty well through to the 10th of March. If you are thinking carefully about, do you want to stay located where you are as you start the year, or do you want to make some changes, or do you or don't you want to leave a relationship which isn't working for you? And I think that could be an issue for some Scorpio people. Or if you're single, how do you find the extra security that's going to be so important to you? I feel that that retrograde is really going to see you doing some deep thinking. But by the middle of May, Jupiter's move into your 5th house is absolutely glorious. It's a real opportunity to show your artistry, your flair, your skills in that regard. Embrace that opportunity. Now, the lunation of the 26th of May actually forges a beautiful broad angle to Jupiter, and that's giving you lots of encouragement to try to make the most of your resources, but particularly your creativity. So if you can use your talents in order to improve your revenue streams, then go for it. However, by the solar eclipse, which occurs on the 10th of June, you are challenged a bit more, because that is also embracing a retrograde with Mercury, but it's also in a right angle with Neptune. And that's kind of saying to you in the second half of this year that if a love ambition of yours is not really workable, for example, if there's someone you're madly taken with, but they're not truly available, or you're not, or they live in a completely different location, or the finances don't quite add up in some way, or what you're being told, it's all a bit mysterious, but you can't quite get to the nub of what this person's about. It could cause some mischief for you in the second half of the year, or you may decide to just go for it and really have an opportunity to be much more heightened and enlightened and ascend into a much more beautiful potential of your nature. Because like every zodiac sign, you have your lower needs and your higher self. Your higher self could convert that solar eclipse into something quite magical. Your lower self could see you go for a short-term opportunity, either financially or sexually, which doesn't actually bring you any lasting benefits. However, as we come into the last phase of the year and we have the Mercury retrograde in your sign, I do feel that that could see you really recalibrating your thinking in some ways. Also, by the 19th of November, there is a lunar eclipse in your opposite sign, and this could be make or break for a particular relationship. But Venus moves into a glorious conjunction with your modern ruler Pluto as this year comes to a close. And we also have another Sagittarius solar eclipse, this time on the 4th of December. So once more, that's going to be saying to you that you want to see tangible benefits in terms of your earnings, your sense of self-worth, or enjoying the more sensory or sensual side of life. So that's going to be very good for you in 2022 too. And then in the final 3 days of the year, Jupiter rejoins you in that quite magical 5th house. So if there is a relationship that is going through a transition this year, I think it could have a moment of glory from the middle of May through to the end of July. But then there could be some maybe stop-starts, maybe some pauses, maybe some uncertainties. Maybe what you're trying to balance is your desire against your most practical needs, or the needs of other people that you've been involved with before now. But as the year draws to a close, I think a new dawn is really coming through for you. And I think you're going to be feeling much more comfortable within yourself, because the stresses and strains that that square between Uranus and Saturn does cause in the first half of this year, it's going to affect all of us, quite frankly, Scorpio. It's not just you. I do feel that you're going to be resolving that. And one of the things I love about your zodiac sign, even if there are times this year when you do want to step back and have that complete quiet, or there are times this year when you're going to be more daring around a relationship, or times of this year when you may feel even a little bit frightened, what I love about your sign is that when change really does call out to you, you can embrace it so wholesomely, and it happens in the most dramatic of ways. But up until that point, you can resist. But I think Uranus is really the key player in suggesting that if it's a relationship matter, it's going to be difficult to resist much longer. If it's a home, emotional or family issue, Saturn's suggesting that if something has been intolerable, it could become more intolerable, or it's suggesting that if there's something to build up and make stronger, it can get a lot stronger. So you have lots of options this year. Remember, you're in charge of the process. These overall planetary influences are only a guide. It's your personal forecast which really unlocks the real possibilities. But for now, It's been a real pleasure being with you. I'm wishing you all the very best. Stay safe, God bless, and good luck.